The morning sun bathed Jakarta in golden light as Alira Mahendra sat in front of the mirror, her bridal veil already pinned delicately to her sleek, dark hair. A soft smile played on her lips, poised, elegant, controlled. The makeup artist complimented her glow, calling her the most radiant bride she had ever worked on. But Alira wasn't glowing from happiness. She was glowing because she had perfected the art of hiding pain. Outside the bridal suite, voices buzzed with excitement. Paparazzi waited at the gates. The venue, an elite glass garden owned by the Aryasatya family, was draped in white roses and dripping with luxury. It was supposed to be the wedding of the year, the only daughter of a respected middle-class family marrying into Jakarta's high society. A fairy tale, they said. A modern Cinderella story. But Cinderella didn't know about the mistress. Alira did. 2 weeks before the wedding, she had found out. A lipstick-stained shirt, a name in a reservation log, a photo that had accidentally backed up into their shared cloud. Kezia Marlena, young, ambitious, gorgeous, and not just a fling. Daven had been seeing her for at least 6 months. Alira remembered staring at the photo in silence, not screaming, not crying, just calculating. She could have called off the wedding. She could have confronted Daven in rage, thrown the ring at his face, and walked away. But Alira wasn't impulsive. She had grown up watching her widowed mother handle storms with silence. And Alira learned that silence, if sharpened enough, could slice deeper than any scream. So she smiled. Daven entered the bridal suite an hour before the ceremony, an unusual move, but one no one questioned. He was dashing in his custom black tuxedo, his smile wide and practiced. "You look like a dream," he whispered, taking her hand and kissing her knuckles. "You're everything I ever wanted." Alira tilted her head and met his gaze. "I know," she said simply. That was the truth. She was everything he wanted, but not everything he deserved. As they stood together under the floral arch later that afternoon, guests gasped at their beauty. Cameras clicked nonstop. News outlets posted live updates. Jakarta's golden couple, one headline read, "Power meets grace." Alira's mother cried quietly in the front row, pride swelling in her tired eyes. Daven's parents, seated regally like royalty, smiled approvingly. Alira's heart twisted, not because of love, but because she wished she could believe it all was real. She wished her wedding day wasn't already a performance. When the officiant asked her if she accepted Daven Aryasatya as her husband, Alira looked up at the sky for a brief moment. Her silence stretched just a little too long, enough for a few people to shift in their seats. But then she smiled again, so beautiful, so blinding, and said, "I do." The crowd erupted in applause. As they walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, Alira whispered to him, "We're going to have a perfect marriage." Daven grinned, clueless. "Yes, we are." But Alira wasn't talking about love. She was talking about control. That night, during the reception, she danced like every other joyful bride. Her laughter floated across the hall. She thanked guests graciously, accepted compliments with gratitude, and posed for every camera with her new husband by her side. But her eyes scanned the room with quiet precision. She saw Kezia, dressed in champagne satin, standing near the bar. Their eyes met for a split second. Kezia looked away first. Alira's smile didn't falter. She raised a glass of champagne, not to toast her marriage, but to mark the first move in a game only she knew was being played. And the perfect bride never forgets. Shall I continue to chapter 2 with the same tone and structure? 2 years into the marriage, Alira Mahendra became everything society expected from a perfect wife. She was poised, well-spoken, always present at the right events, and never once let the public catch even a glimpse of weakness. Her image was flawless. She hosted charity dinners, smiled through interviews, and stood beside Daven during every business triumph. People adored her. They admired the grace with which she handled herself, assuming her life was filled with love, diamonds, and security. They didn't know it was also filled with secrets. The truth lived behind glass walls, transparent yet untouched. Daven had grown more confident in his deception. His affair with Kezia no longer required caution. While he never brought it into their home, he had made it clear through his actions that he no longer feared consequences. He would come home late without explanation, his phone always locked, and his touch colder with each passing month. But in public, he remained the charming husband. He kissed Alira's cheek in front of cameras, posted loving captions on social media, and made sure the illusion was alive. Alira let him believe she was fooled. At home, she played her role well. She cooked, she dressed impeccably, she listened when he talked about business deals he assumed she didn't understand. But when he left, she studied. She learned. She slowly connected names, faces, patterns. She read company memos, compared budgets, and quietly traced suspicious transfers between departments. She kept everything in a locked folder labeled innocently as event logistics. The moment that shifted everything came at the Arya Satya Foundation's charity gala. It was an annual event held in a private ballroom overlooking the city skyline. Mirrored ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and walls of glass that revealed more than they hid. Alira wore a deep emerald gown that night, one Daven had chosen for her weeks before. She looked like perfection beside him, her fingers interlaced with his as they welcomed the elite of Jakarta. Kezia was there too, not as a guest, but as part of the event team. Alira noticed her standing near the AV console, clipboard in hand, headset on, pretending to work. But her eyes weren't on the soundboard. They were on Daven. And Daven, careless and smug, looked back at her with something that didn't belong in a room full of high society. It was brief, but unmistakable. A glance that lingered. A smirk that curved too easily. A connection that only lovers share when they think no one else is watching. But Alira watched, and she remembered. Later that night, as Daven mingled with board members, Alira stepped away with the excuse of needing air. She found her way to the back corridor, where staff lockers and temporary storage were kept. She waited behind a pillar, perfectly still, barely breathing. 10 minutes passed before she saw Kezia slip out from the event floor, checking over her shoulder. She didn't see Alira. Alira followed, just enough to watch her enter a locked lounge room, one used only by executives. Daven appeared 5 minutes later, heading the same direction. He didn't even look around. He simply walked in. Alira didn't need to see more. She turned around and walked back to the ballroom, her expression unchanged. She smiled and greeted the deputy minister's wife, posed for a photo with the event sponsor, and when Daven returned 20 minutes later, she handed him a glass of wine and whispered, "You're amazing tonight." That night, while he slept beside her, dead to the world, Alira opened her laptop. She accessed the backup cloud Daven never bothered to clear. She found more than she expected. Photos, voice messages, a video from a private resort in Bali dated just 3 months ago. She recognized the room because it was the same suite Daven had said he booked for a client. Kezia's laugh in the background was clear. Alira downloaded everything. She encrypted the files and saved them to an external drive she locked inside a safe beneath her desk. She added a new name to her list, Kezia Marlena. The next morning, Daven acted like any normal husband. He kissed her forehead, complimented her breakfast, and left for work. Alira sat at the table a little longer, sipping her tea, letting the warmth calm her racing thoughts. She no longer felt anger, not even sadness. She felt strategy. She wasn't interested in tearing them apart in private. No, that would be too simple. She wanted everyone who ever praised Daven as a visionary, a golden boy, a perfect husband, to see what he truly was. She wanted the world to remember her not as the woman he fooled, but as the woman who played along until she held all the cards, and she would get there, one secret at a time. The office hallway was silent when Alira stepped out of the elevator, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. It wasn't her usual place to visit. She rarely came to Daven's company unless it was for an important event. But that day, she brought lunch as an excuse. The receptionist greeted her warmly, unaware that Alira had another reason for being there. On the way to Davin's office, she passed the HR board that listed recent hires. Her eyes scanned the names almost casually until she saw one. Kezia Marlena, assistant to the corporate affairs director. Alira paused. It wasn't a shock. It wasn't even surprising. It was insulting. Of all the people Davin could have hired, he had chosen to give Kezia an office keycard and a salary from the same business Alira helped restructure 2 years ago. The company that bore the initials of her family's legacy in its expansion plan. And now, the other woman was walking its halls, paid, protected, and hidden in plain sight. Alira didn't say a word that day. Not to Davin. Not to anyone. That evening, she waited until Davin came home, poured him wine, and asked, calmly, if there was any reason he hadn't told her about Kezia's employment. Davin froze just for a second, enough for her to notice. Then he smiled, leaned back on the couch, and gave the most common answer a guilty man could give. Are you really going to bring this up again, Alira? She's just an employee. You're reading too much into things. You always do. She watched him. He spoke like a man in control, a man who believed his charm was stronger than truth. He called her paranoid, told her she was overthinking, even added that she might need a break because she'd been too intense lately. Gaslighting. It didn't sting like it used to. Instead, Alira just listened, nodded, and agreed to let it go. But she didn't. 2 weeks later, Alira created a new identity, one clean, simple, and impossible to trace back to her. Using an old business contact, she formed a consulting brand under the name Sasha Anindya, a marketing strategist. She built a portfolio using work from her earlier years and set up a website, social accounts, and a fresh alias email. Everything looked real, professional, harmless. Then she reached out to Kezia. Through her company, Alira sent a job request for a small promotional campaign and asked Kezia to be the freelance liaison for internal coordination. Kezia, eager to climb, responded almost immediately. They set up a coffee meeting in a neutral location, an upscale cafe in Menteng, far from the office radar. When they met, Alira wore glasses, her hair loose and styled differently. Her voice was lighter, her tone casual. Kezia didn't recognize her. She talked about herself too much, revealed too many things too fast. About her past job in retail PR, about how she got hired into Davin's company through a personal connection, and how close she was to some of the senior people. Alira pretended to be impressed. She didn't ask too many questions. She let Kezia offer the information freely. That was the trick. Never push, just listen. By their third meeting, Kezia was already sharing details she shouldn't. Who managed which division? Who had access to what passwords hadn't changed in months? She even joked about knowing where the CEO stored sensitive reports because sometimes she handled his printouts when the secretary wasn't around. It was enough. Alira smiled, praised her confidence, and said she'd love to work with her more in the future. After that meeting, she didn't need to fake another one. The information had been harvested. At home, Alira started assembling a new file. She labeled it Project Mercury. It contained screenshots, voice recordings, and internal document samples that Kezia had shared unintentionally, all tied to Davin's leadership, all pointing to potential mismanagement, and all backed with timestamps and third-party references. But more than that, Alira began collecting the emotional weapons too. She now knew where Kezia lived, what car she drove, who her roommates were. She knew what kind of perfume she wore, what clubs she went to, what brand of lipstick she left on Davin's collar last Christmas. One evening, after Davin fell asleep early with a headache, Alira stood in front of the full-length mirror in her closet. She looked at herself, not as the wife or the victim, but as a woman who had become something else entirely. She put on the same shade of lipstick she saw Kezia wear. Then she wiped it clean. She wasn't Kezia. She didn't need to compete. She didn't need to seduce or beg or cry. She was building something bigger. In the reflection, she saw both of them, herself and the other woman, but only one of them was in control. The rain had just started to fall when Alira stepped out of the car, umbrella in hand, in front of a modest home tucked away in the old district of South Jakarta. It wasn't the type of house you'd expect someone like Aditya Brahmasta to live in. He had once been a respected businessman, her late father's closest ally in the early days of their small investment firm. But after the economic collapse a decade ago, Aditya withdrew from the spotlight and chose a quieter life. That suited Alira perfectly. She didn't come for noise, she came for truth. Aditya welcomed her with warm eyes and a voice that hadn't changed since she was a teenager. They exchanged polite conversation, but the heaviness in Alira's tone told him this wasn't just a courtesy visit. He led her to a private study, filled with dusty books and old files, and poured her tea without asking questions. "My father trusted you," Alira began, her voice steady but low. "He always said if something ever happened to him, you'd know where the rest of the puzzle is." Aditya studied her face carefully, then nodded slowly. "He didn't tell you directly?" "No," she said. "He passed before he could." The older man sighed, opened a drawer, and pulled out a thick brown envelope. Inside were papers Alira had never seen, documents with her father's name, signatures from board meetings she didn't attend, and most importantly, shares. Real ones, hidden ones. It was clear. Her father had quietly invested in Arya Satya Group during its first expansion wave, securing a stake that had been left out of public records, likely for tax shielding and corporate protection. The shares were registered under a trust, managed discreetly by Aditya. "These were always meant for you," he said gently. "Your father wanted you to be protected. He knew the world Davin came from, and he knew one day you might need leverage." Alira sat in silence, hands trembling slightly as she read each page. The legal power of the trust was absolute. With Aditya's help, she could begin the transfer process immediately, and no one in Davin's circle would be alerted unless they specifically looked for it. Even then, the shell company owning the shares was buried beneath layers of legal fog. Perfect. She stayed for hours that day, combing through archives, listening to Aditya recount stories of her father's strategic mind. There was pain, yes, but also clarity. Her father hadn't left her unarmed. He had left her prepared. That week, Alira began the transfer quietly. With Aditya as the trustee, she initiated the movement of the shares to her new entity, named simply EM Legacy Holdings. It sounded harmless, clean. No one would suspect that the name belonged to a woman they thought was just a pretty wife with expensive shoes and a designer smile. Every step was measured. She used offshore accounts, legal proxies, and digital authorizations set up with precision. No signatures were ever traced back to her directly. No alarms were raised in Davin's company. The shares moved like ghosts, changing hands without making noise. At home, Alira acted no differently. She still cooked Davin's favorite meals. She still attended corporate dinners, laughed with his colleagues, and even complimented Kezia when they crossed paths in public. Her mask never slipped. But behind that mask, she now held real power. She started joining shareholder calls under a pseudonym, listening silently. She noticed gaps in Davin's reports, risks he overlooked, projects he pushed without oversight. The deeper she studied, the more she realized Davin wasn't just immoral. He was reckless. And Kezia, the so-called secret weapon, was nothing more than an enabler with pretty words and no vision. One evening, Davin came home drunk. He ranted about a board meeting gone wrong, about an investor pulling out last minute. Alira handed him a glass of water, tucked him into bed, and whispered soothing words. Then she returned to her study and opened her laptop. She called Aditya. Her voice was calm but resolute. "I want to exercise my voting rights next quarter," she said. "You'll make waves," he warned. "I'm ready." She wasn't interested in watching from the sidelines anymore. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about building something that no one could ever take away from her again. Davin had stolen trust. Kezia had stolen dignity. Alira would steal the empire. She glanced at her reflection in the laptop screen. Not the perfect wife, not the betrayed woman, but a legacy reclaimed. The office lights had long been dimmed when Alira sat alone at her desk, the soft hum of the air conditioning the only sound breaking the stillness. It was just past midnight. Davin had fallen asleep hours ago after returning from what he claimed was a bored dinner. He didn't smell like food. He smelled like expensive perfume that Alira didn't wear. She no longer wasted time asking questions. Instead, she opened her laptop, connected a small encrypted drive, and pulled up a custom program Aditya's IT contact had created for her. It was elegant, discreet, and precise, designed to mimic Davin's cloud login from a recognized IP without alerting any device. She entered his credentials. The system granted access. The cloud was a trove of carelessness. Davin's folders were named with bland business labels, Q3 reports, legal contracts, CSR events, but inside, Alira quickly found personal files hidden in layers of subfolders. Her eyes scanned line after line of file names until she paused on one labeled Private KM. She clicked. Inside were images of hotel reservations, high-end spa bills, and jewelry receipts, all addressed to Kezia Marlina. Dates matched the weekends Davin said he was on retreats or conferences. There were private jet invoices under the company's discretionary travel budget. Alira opened one receipt showing a $12,500 necklace purchase. The shipping address wasn't their house. It was an apartment in Kuningan, Kezia's apartment. Worse than betrayal was the method. He used company money. Business cards, reimbursed transfers, fake consulting invoices billed from a shell name, KM Ventures. Alira cross-checked the account details and confirmed what she already suspected. Kezia had become more than a mistress. She was now his silent partner in theft. At the bottom of the folder was a document titled Letters for Her. Alira hesitated a moment, then opened it. There were 10 love letters, digital, typed. The words were clumsy but raw. Davin poured out fantasies of starting fresh, of leaving the coldness behind, of building a new life with someone who makes me feel alive again. He described Alira as distant, like a business arrangement, and Kezia as the woman who believed in me when no one else did. Alira didn't blink. She didn't rage. She selected every file and backed them up into a new folder titled Mercury Core, the heart of her operation. She encrypted them with 2 keys and uploaded them into separate drives, one physical, one cloud-based. Then she printed 2 copies of the letters, folded them slowly, and sealed them in envelopes marked for legal counsel. This wasn't about divorce. This was about destruction. The next day, Davin kissed her cheek before leaving for the office. He complimented her breakfast, told her he had a long day ahead. Alira nodded, her expression warm. When he left, she sat back in her chair and opened a clean notebook. On the first page, she wrote a checklist. 1, evidence of fraud. 2, funds linked to Kezia. 3, cloud backup. 4, paper trail. 5, trusted witness, Aditya. 6, legal buffer pending. 7, public timing, to plan Nahin. Each checkmark wasn't just a task done. It was another brick in the wall she was building around him. Later that week, Kezia posted a filtered photo on her private account. Champagne glass, city lights, a reflection of Davin's silhouette in the window. Alira took a screenshot. Let her have her moment. Because when it all came crashing down, that glass would shatter too, and Alira would be holding the ledgers, the letters, and the truth, ready for the final act. The invitation arrived in thick white envelopes embossed with gold foil. One side read, Arya Satya Group 10-year anniversary gala. The other, in elegant script, a celebration of love, Davin and Alira's vow renewal. Alira read it slowly, letting her fingers trace the expensive edges. She looked up at Davin, who stood proudly in their living room, his tie loosened after a long day, eyes full of practiced affection. I want the world to remember what we've built together, he said with a smile. Business, love, it all started with you. Alira smiled back, soft, polished, almost touched. Of course, she replied. Let's make it unforgettable. He nodded, kissed her forehead, and left to take a call. Alira turned back to the invitation and placed it gently on the table. Unforgettable was exactly the plan. Behind the scenes, David had no idea his timing was perfect. For Alira, the gala was a double celebration. A corporate anniversary and their public vow renewal. Media would attend, investors, family, even ministers. It was the ideal stage, the perfect curtain. And Kezia? Kezia believed she was next in line. Alira had intercepted a private text exchange between them 2 nights earlier, messages filled with longing and manipulation. David had written, "After the gala, I'll make things official. Be patient, baby." Kezia had responded with a selfie in lingerie, captioned, "Just remind me I'm worth it." Alira had smiled, then deleted the messages from the synced cloud before David noticed. The next morning, Alira personally called the event planner. She requested that the screen for the evening's media presentation be enlarged. She also asked that the final 10 minutes of the slideshow be reserved for a surprise. No one questioned her. It was her vow renewal, after all. She then contacted the head of legal from Arya Satya Group under a confidential clause, setting up a brief meeting 2 days before the event. She delivered sealed envelopes marked urgent to be opened upon public request. The lawyer, an old friend of her father, raised a brow but didn't ask questions. She paid him well. She booked a private room at the venue, 1 floor above the ballroom with direct screen access. Inside that room, she installed her laptop and 2 encrypted drives, 1 with backup, 1 with the truth. On the surface, everything was lovely. David gushed on social media about the love of his life. Alira approved the seating chart. Kezia posted subtle hints on Instagram about something beautiful coming soon, while flaunting new jewelry, gifts bought with stolen company funds. On the day of the gala, Alira woke up early. She bathed slowly, did her own makeup, wore a white satin gown, simple, elegant, and powerful. Her hair flowed over one shoulder. She looked like the perfect bride all over again. But she wasn't walking into a wedding. She was walking into war. The ballroom glittered with lights and money. Crystal centerpieces reflected candle flames, and every guest arrived dressed for luxury. Alira welcomed them with practiced grace. Kezia stood across the room in a champagne-colored gown, her eyes locking with Alira's for a second too long. Alira greeted her with a nod and moved on. At 8:47 p.m., David took the stage. He gave a heartfelt speech about growth, leadership, and unshakable partnership. He thanked Alira, kissed her hand, and announced a special video tribute to their journey together. The lights dimmed, the screen lit up. The first few minutes were sweet. Wedding clips, news articles, family photos. The audience clapped politely. David held Alira's hand, unaware she had moved her finger to the remote clicker hidden in her clutch. At minute 6, the screen flickered, then shifted. Receipts, account transfers, photos of Kezia and David at private resorts, some intimate, some damning. Voice recordings of whispered conversations, laughter, promises. Then a line of text, Arya Satya Group, misused funds, fake invoices, internal fraud. The room fell into stunned silence. Alira stepped forward, her voice calm through the mic. Tonight was never about love. It was about truth. This company was built on lies. This marriage on betrayal. She turned to David, who had turned pale. Everything you hid is now public. The board has been notified. The law firm has the files. Your accounts are frozen. Gasps, cameras flashing. Kezia rushed to leave, but was stopped by 2 men at the door. Private investigators Alira had hired to ensure no one fled. Alira didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She simply removed her wedding ring, held it up for everyone to see, and dropped it to the floor. A soft clink, louder than any scream. Then she walked off stage as security approached David. She didn't look back. Her vow was done, and so was he. The invitation arrived in thick white envelopes embossed with gold foil. One side read, Arya Satya Group 10-year anniversary gala. The other, in elegant script, a celebration of love, David and Alira's vow renewal. Alira read it slowly, letting her fingers trace the expensive edges. She looked up at David, who stood proudly in their living room, his tie loosened after a long day, eyes full of practiced affection. "I want the world to remember what we've built together," he said with a smile. "Business, love, it all started with you." Alira smiled back, soft, polished, almost touched. "Of course," she replied. "Let's make it unforgettable." He nodded, kissed her forehead, and left to take a call. Alira turned back to the invitation and placed it gently on the table. Unforgettable was exactly the plan. Behind the scenes, Davin had no idea his timing was perfect. For Alira, the gala was a double celebration, a corporate anniversary and their public vow renewal. Media would attend, investors, family, even ministers. It was the ideal stage, the perfect curtain. And Kezia? Kezia believed she was next in line. Alira had intercepted a private text exchange between them 2 nights earlier, messages filled with longing and manipulation. Davin had written, "After the gala, I'll make things official. Be patient, baby." Kezia had responded with a selfie in lingerie, captioned, "Just remind me I'm worth it." Alira had smiled, then deleted the messages from the synced cloud before Davin noticed. The next morning, Alira personally called the event planner. She requested that the screen for the evening's media presentation be enlarged. She also asked that the final 10 minutes of the slideshow be reserved for a surprise. No one questioned her. It was her vow renewal, after all. She then contacted the head of legal from Arya Satya Group under a confidential clause, setting up a brief meeting 2 days before the event. She delivered sealed envelopes marked urgent, to be opened upon public request. The lawyer, an old friend of her father, raised a brow but didn't ask questions. She paid him well. She booked a private room at the venue, 1 floor above the ballroom, with direct screen access. Inside that room, she installed her laptop and 2 encrypted drives, 1 with backup, 1 with the truth. On the surface, everything was lovely. Davin gushed on social media about the love of his life. Alira approved the seating chart. Kezia posted subtle hints on Instagram about something beautiful coming soon, while flaunting new jewelry, gifts bought with stolen company funds. On the day of the gala, Alira woke up early. She bathed slowly, did her own makeup, wore a white satin gown, simple, elegant, and powerful. Her hair flowed over one shoulder. She looked like the perfect bride all over again. But she wasn't walking into a wedding. She was walking into war. The ballroom glittered with lights and money. Crystal centerpieces reflected candle flames, and every guest arrived dressed for luxury. Alira welcomed them with practiced grace. Kezia stood across the room in a champagne-colored gown, her eyes locking with Alira's for a second too long. Alira greeted her with a nod and moved on. At 8:47 p.m., Davin took the stage. He gave a heartfelt speech about growth, leadership, and unshakable partnership. He thanked Alira, kissed her hand, and announced a special video tribute to their journey together. The lights dimmed, the screen lit up. The first few minutes were sweet. Wedding clips, news articles, family photos. The audience clapped politely. Davin held Alira's hand, unaware she had moved her finger to the remote clicker hidden in her clutch. At minute 6, the screen flickered, then shifted. Receipts, account transfers, photos of Kezia and Davin at private resorts, some intimate, some damning. Voice recordings of whispered conversations, laughter, promises. Then a line of text, Arya Satya Group, misused funds, fake invoices, internal fraud. The room fell into stunned silence. Alira stepped forward, her voice calm through the mic. Tonight was never about love. It was about truth. This company was built on lies. This marriage on betrayal. She turned to Davin, who had turned pale. Everything you hid is now public. The board has been notified. The law firm has the files. Your accounts are frozen. Gasps, cameras flashing. Kezia rushed to leave but was stopped by 2 men at the door. Private investigators Alira had hired to ensure no one fled. Alira didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She simply removed her wedding ring, held it up for everyone to see, and dropped it to the floor. A soft clink, louder than any scream. Then she walked off stage as security approached Davin. She didn't look back. Her vow was done, and so was he. Chapter 7, Night of the Swan. The ballroom remained suspended in stillness as Alira took center stage, the soft train of her satin gown whispering across the marble floor. In the golden light of chandeliers above, she looked like a vision, elegant, poised, and radiant. Dozens of guests, their glasses halfway to their lips, smiled with admiration. Cameras flashed. Some dabbed their eyes, touched by what they assumed would be a heartfelt speech from a loyal wife. Alira adjusted the microphone. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this special night, a night that's meant to celebrate 10 years of business excellence and a love story that supposedly stood the test of time. A few chuckles, polite nods. She smiled softly, but there was a weight behind her words. Tonight, I've decided to break a tradition. Instead of simply standing here and reciting romantic promises, I'll be giving you something far more important, the truth. She paused. The room stiffened. Behind her, the LED screen glitched once, then displayed a still image. Davin and Kezia, arms around each other at a private beach resort in Bali. Not a promotional photo, a real one. His hand on her waist, her lips on his cheek. Time-stamped. Dated. Gasps echoed from the back of the room. Whispers. Confused murmurs. A few phones immediately lifted to record. Davin stood frozen off stage, his glass slipping from his fingers and crashing quietly against the marble. Kezia, near the bar, backed into a corner, clutching her clutch with shaking hands. Alira turned slightly toward the screen. For 2 years I've lived alongside a lie, she continued. Not just as a wife, but as a woman who gave her time, her silence, and her name to a man who used it all to serve his ego. The next slide appeared. Itemized receipts, expensive jewelry bought with company funds, a villa rental under Kezia's name but paid through Arya Satya Group's marketing division. Then voice memos, Davin's voice, crooning promises, mocking Alira, discussing fund transfers. The crowd no longer pretended. Some stood, others began filming openly. Executives exchanged alarmed looks. Investors were visibly tense. The board members, seated at the front table, stiffened with disbelief. And while I smiled in interviews, hosted your events, shook hands with donors and clients, Alira said, her voice still steady, I was also building something far more meaningful than the perfect marriage. I was collecting evidence. A new image, legal papers, the transfer of trust shares from her father's holdings into her control, her name beside the corporate seals. Her signature, clean, firm, and unmissable. I now hold controlling interest in Arya Satya Group, she said flatly. Effective immediately, Mr. Davin Arya Satya is no longer authorized to represent this company. Davin lurched forward. Alira, stop, he shouted, stepping onto the edge of the stage. But 2 security officers, one she'd hired through a private firm days earlier, intercepted him without needing a word. They didn't restrain him, yet, but their presence sent a clear message. Alira didn't flinch. She met his eyes as she spoke her next words. I was the perfect bride because I was supposed to be invisible. But you forgot something, Davin. Swans don't stay silent forever. They glide through chaos, and when the water turns red, they keep moving. She turned back to the guests, her tone softening. I'm not here to be pitied. I'm here to reclaim my name, my voice, and this company. And for every woman who's been told to smile and stay quiet, let tonight be proof that elegance is not weakness. The room erupted. Not in applause, but in a mixture of gasps, murmurs, and movement. The press had enough footage to last weeks. The board rose from their seats and began pulling Davin aside. A few investors quickly approached Alira's team near the side exits. And Kezia? She tried to leave quietly, slipping toward the doors, but 2 plainclothes agents blocked her path. One lifted a hand, revealing a folded warrant. Alira walked down from the stage as if the performance had ended. But it hadn't. It had only just begun. The cameras followed her, but she didn't look into them. She walked past Davin, who called her name with a voice stripped of authority. She didn't look back. She walked past Kezia, who avoided her gaze completely. She walked out into the warm night air, walked past the stunned valet, her heels tapping against the stone like the sound of a final gavel. Inside, the lights still glowed. Music was gone. The ballroom had turned into a courtroom without a judge. But Alira had already won, not because she ruined him, but because she made them all watch her do it with grace. The aftermath unfolded faster than anyone expected. Within an hour of Alira's revelation, the ballroom that once sparkled with crystal chandeliers and polished champagne glasses had turned into a battlefield of scandal. Corporate lawyers rushed in. Journalists swarmed like bees, their phones streaming live. Security escorted Davin out of the ballroom as his voice rose in desperation, shouting denials, calling it all a misunderstanding. But no one listened anymore. The screen had shown too much. The paper trail was airtight. The voice recordings had been undeniable. The perfect image of Davin Aryasatya, charismatic CEO, beloved visionary leader, shattered like thin glass under the weight of proof. His crown had cracked, and this time, there was no saving it. Kazia was the first to fall. Two officers from the Financial Crimes Division, already on standby, stepped in quietly and presented her with a warrant. Her face, once smug and radiant, drained of color as the words fraud, embezzlement, and corporate theft were spoken aloud in front of the guests. Handcuffed discreetly, she tried to maintain composure, but her trembling hands betrayed her. She looked for Davin, but he was already gone. No hero to protect her. Only cameras to witness her collapse. Meanwhile, the Aryasatya family, seated at the front table, sat stiff and humiliated. Davin's mother, who had once looked down on Alira for being too ordinary, lowered her head in shame. His father stood slowly, nodded to a board member nearby, and made his way toward the exit. On his way out, he spoke just once to the press. "We are deeply disappointed. Davin no longer represents our name, and we support the immediate transfer of authority to Mrs. Alira Mahendra." The declaration went viral within minutes. As guests murmured, whispered, and reshuffled in their seats, Alira remained standing calmly by the stage. A silence followed her every step as she returned to the mic one last time. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to gloat. "This isn't just the end of a partnership," she said clearly, holding a slim folder in her hand. "It's the beginning of a new chapter." She turned to the notary beside her, who handed her the divorce papers. With a firm stroke of her pen, Alira signed her name. Then she held the signed document high for the audience to see. Visible, undeniable, final. No arguments, no forgiveness, no chance of reversal. The room split into reactions. Some people stood in stunned silence, still unable to process what they had witnessed. Others applauded, not out of celebration, but out of respect. A few women in the crowd especially clapped with teary eyes. Businessmen nodded in reluctant admiration. Alira stepped down from the stage, the divorce papers still in her hand, and passed through the crowd with the grace of someone who had just walked away from a fire she didn't start, but had finished. Behind her, the screen faded to black. The band never resumed playing. People began to leave in groups, their voices low, their eyes wide. It was the kind of night people would talk about for years, a night when the Golden Prince lost everything, and the quiet wife rose not in anger, but in undeniable power. Outside the ballroom, Davin was surrounded by his own board. No one reached out to help him. His phone buzzed nonstop, calls from sponsors withdrawing, brands distancing, investors dissolving ties. He had built his empire on lies, and now he stood alone in its ruins. In the back of the venue, Alira stood with her legal advisor, her assistant, and a press liaison. She gave no interviews. She made no statement. But before entering her car, she looked at the building one last time. The place where she had once smiled for her wedding photos. The place where she had quietly danced in his shadow. The place where she was once just someone's wife. Now it was the place where she had ended an illusion and reclaimed her crown, not a broken one, but one she forged herself. The morning after the gala, Jakarta woke up to headlines that sounded like fiction. The Fall of Devan Aryasatya, Betrayal, Fraud, and a Wife's Masterstroke. Alira Mahendra, the woman who brought down a giant. Corporate Cinderella or silent assassin. Media outlets from television to digital platforms scrambled to piece together what had happened the night before. Snippets of Alira's speech flooded social media. Slow-motion clips of her walking off stage, the ring falling to the floor, the final signature, all turned into viral sound bites. Hashtags trended. People speculated, admired, envied, feared. And yet, Alira said nothing. She didn't take a single interview. She didn't post a statement. She didn't appear on television or write a blog post. Her team politely declined every request, releasing only a short message. Mrs. Alira Mahendra has no further comment at this time. She believes the truth has already been spoken. While the city buzzed in her name, she quietly disappeared. Not into hiding, but in she drove herself. No chauffeur, no press, into the southern outskirts of the city, where the buildings were smaller, the roads quieter, and the air warmer. Her destination was a modest orphanage painted in peeling colors and lined with dusty flowering trees. Panti Asuhan Harapan Kecil. It was the same orphanage her late father used to visit every month. He had never told many people about it. No press ever followed him there. He came to donate books, fix broken lights, and sit quietly with the children as if they were his own. It was one of the few places Alira remembered feeling real love, without condition, without cameras, without control. The caretaker, an elderly woman named Bu Retno, welcomed her with open arms and watery eyes. She didn't ask about the headlines. She didn't comment on the gown Alira had worn or the scandal that had exploded online. She simply hugged her and said, "Your father would be proud." Alira handed over a sealed envelope, documents signed with the help of her legal team. In it was the partial transfer of her trust holdings. A percentage of the shares she now controlled would belong to the orphanage permanently in a managed endowment. Enough to rebuild, expand, and support generations of children. They sat under a guava tree afterward. Children played nearby, unaware that the woman beside them had just unseated one of the most powerful men in the country. One small boy gave her a plastic toy dinosaur and ran off laughing. She held it in her hand for a long time. It was peaceful there. No whispers, no lies. She didn't cry. But in the quiet, something inside her released. Something that had been locked behind years of silence, of smiling through betrayal, of being underestimated. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like freedom. Back in the city, Devan was cornered. His accounts had been frozen. Investigations had begun. The board had voted to remove him entirely, not just as CEO, but from any internal position of power. Sponsors pulled out, brands cut ties, even former friends refused to take his calls. He became a pariah overnight, a symbol of arrogance undone. Kezia remained in custody, pending trial. Her name, once a whisper in the corners of executive halls, now sat beside headlines like embezzler and mistress turned accomplice. Her apartment was emptied, her job gone, her future stained. Meanwhile, Alira quietly returned home, not to the penthouse, but to her late parents' home, a simple house with creaking steps and old windows that let in too much light. She didn't need luxury anymore. Not now. Not after she had already proven her worth. She spent her mornings reading, watering the plants her mother used to care for, her afternoons with lawyers and foundations, her evenings watching the sky change color without needing to report to anyone. She had stayed, through humiliation, through betrayal, through nights she couldn't sleep from the weight of secrets. And now she stayed as herself, fully, finally. The city would remember the scandal, but the children at the orphanage, they would remember the woman who showed up, quiet, kind, and victorious. The afternoon sun cast golden slants of light through the trees as Alira stepped barefoot into the private garden behind her family home. It was a small space, nothing extravagant, just a worn wooden bench beneath a frangipani tree, soft earth beneath her toes, and the faint scent of jasmine carried by the breeze. She carried no phone, no briefcase, no entourage, just herself. In her hand was the wedding ring. She sat quietly on the bench, the wood warm from the sun. For a long time, she didn't move. She listened to the soft rustling of leaves, the distant hum of traffic, the chirping of birds unaware of the headlines or the lives that had been broken just days ago. Alira held the ring up to the light. It gleamed the same way it had the day Vin slipped it on her finger before the cameras, before the lies, before the betrayal. The diamond was flawless, the band smooth and cold. A perfect symbol for an imperfect man. She turned it slowly between her fingers. Not long ago, this ring had weighed heavily on her hand. It had represented sacrifice, silence, endurance. Every smile she wore in public had wrapped itself around this band. Every time she bit her tongue while Davin lied, it had dug into her skin. But not anymore. With a deep breath, Alira pressed her fingers into the soft earth beside the bench. She dug gently, not needing much space. Then slowly, reverently, she placed the ring into the shallow hole. She covered it with soil and patted it down with her palm. There was no ceremony, no dramatic music, just the quiet satisfaction of letting go. It wasn't about revenge anymore. Not really. She hadn't exposed Davin to ruin him, though that had been the result. She hadn't torn down their marriage for applause, though she had received more than enough of it. What she had wanted, what she had fought for, in silence and in strategy, was something no one else could give her. Clarity, dignity, peace. She had spent years being the woman who stayed, the woman who smiled, who endured, who didn't speak when she should have. But silence wasn't weakness, it was patience. It was choosing the right moment to strike, not out of hate, but out of self-respect. Now in this quiet garden, no longer a wife, no longer a pawn, Alira Mahendra was simply Alira. She leaned back on the bench and tilted her face to the sun. The warmth kissed her cheeks. Somewhere inside the house, a kettle began to boil. She would have tea soon. She would water her plants. She would review the final drafts of the education grants she had started in her father's name. The world would keep talking about the scandal, the fall of Davin Aryasatya, the arrest of Kezia Marlena, the fortune that changed hands overnight. But Alira had no need to speak. Her silence had already said enough. Because sometimes, strength doesn't come with fire or noise. It doesn't come in storms or screams. Sometimes it comes with a soft smile, a steady hand, and the quiet certainty that you've already won.